So imagine tuning in to the Olympic 100-meter dash. You're sitting there in the stands. The crowd is just absolutely roaring. And the 8 athletes settle into their starting blocks.
Right, the anticipation is huge.
Exactly. The starting gun cracks. But as they take off, you notice something is just horribly wrong. Like the runner in lane 3 is running barefoot over shattered glass.
Ooh, wow, yeah, that's a brutal image.
Right. And then the runner in lane 6, well, they were given a 50-yard head start and are running downhill with a massive tailwind. The rest of them are dodging these random hurdles that just keep popping up out of the track.
It's just total chaos.
Total chaos. But eventually, someone crosses the finish line, they break the tape, and they're handed this shiny gold medal. And the stopwatch, it recorded their time perfectly. It didn't play favorites at all.
Because stopwatches don't care about the track.
Exactly. But as you watch them stand on the podium, you really have to ask yourself, would you actually call that race fair?
It's a deeply uncomfortable image, but it perfectly captures the illusion we deal with every single day. We love the stopwatch, right? Because it gives us this clean, indisputable number.
A metric we can trust.
Yeah. We want to believe that measuring the finish line is exactly the same thing as measuring justice, but a flawlessly accurate stopwatch means absolutely nothing if the track itself is totally tilted.
So true. And today, we are tearing apart a philosophical nightmare that has been, well, quietly running our societies for centuries. We're doing a deep dive into a set of deeply reflective, almost anthropological research notes titled Tira Equality versus Merit.pdf.
It's a fascinating document.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is to explore the absolute fault line of human organization, this ongoing, violently contested war between equality and merit. And let me just establish our ground rules for you listening right now immediately. We're not here to crown a winner.
No, definitely not.
We're not going to bang a gavel and declare that equality is the ultimate moral good or, that merit is the only way to run a country.
Because honestly, treating this like a team sport where one side has to lose is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the human condition. The moment you try to eradicate one of these concepts to perfectly satisfy the other, your society just begins to collapse.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the core paradox we're looking at today from the document, it hits like a punch to the gut. The more equal you make outcomes across a society, the less individual effort actually seems to matter.
Yes.
You are caught in this trap where you have to choose between two totally different types of human dignity.
And that distinction regarding dignity, that is the key to this entire puzzle. This isn't just some debate about tax brackets or, school admissions. It's a literal battle over how we define human worth.
Right.
On one side of the battlefield, equality is furiously trying to protect the dignity of persons. The foundational belief here is that no human being should be crushed or starved or discarded simply because of the cosmic accident of their birth.
Which makes total sense.
But then, on the opposing side, merit is fiercely protecting the dignity of agency. It insists that our choices, our discipline, our sacrifices, and, our relentless late nights must actually mean something.
They have to count for something tangible in the real world.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you simply cannot have a functioning, sane society that completely ignores either of those dignities. Like, if you ignore the dignity of persons, you just get a brutal Darwinian dystopia.
Everyone out for themselves.
Right. But if you ignore the dignity of agency, you get a stagnant, depressing world where striving is entirely pointless.
Which is why this tension is the invisible lens shaping your world right now. Whether you are listening to this deep dive on your commute, at your desk, or, while folding the laundry.
It's everywhere.
It is. When you manage a team and you try to figure out if everyone gets the same baseline bonus, or if only the top performer gets the payout, you are navigating this tension. When you look at the bitter polarization in our national politics, you're watching this tension play out on a massive scale.
You really are.
So before we can understand why these two ideals clash so violently, we have to look at why human beings are so fiercely, biologically drawn to both of them. Let's look at the starting line versus the finish line.
Well, the instinct for equality usually doesn't originate from a place of jealousy or envy, which, is a very common misconception. It actually originates as a profound moral protest.
A protest against what, exactly?
And the rallying cry of that protest is that fate should not masquerade as virtue.
Fate masquerading as virtue. I want to dwell on that for a second because life is objectively not a fair race. Let's look at the World Bank's framework for equality of opportunity that the text cites. They argue that success should be dictated by your choices, your effort, and your innate talents, entirely decoupled from the circumstances of your birth.
Right, in theory.
But walk outside and look around. I mean, we have children born into families with vast, multi-generational wealth, endless social capital, private tutors, flawless healthcare.
The whole package.
Yeah, and then 3 miles away, we have children born into generational poverty, food insecurity, underfunded schools, and systemic trauma.
And when you lay the reality out like that, the deeply compassionate, profoundly humane appeal of the equality side just becomes undeniable. It operates as a protective mechanism.
Like a safety net.
Exactly. It asserts that basic human goods, shelter, nutrition, baseline respect, they should never be contingent on how ruthlessly you can perform in a market economy. It demands that we judge a civilization not by the towering height of its wealthiest billionaires, but by the floor it builds for its most vulnerable citizens.
I love that phrasing, the floor it builds.
Right, it's basically screaming, we cannot let a disastrous starting line condemn a person to a miserable life.
Let's ground this. I know we often use the Monopoly analogy, where one player starts with hotels on Boardwalk and the other starts bankrupt. But let's look at a modern real-world scenario.
So let's do it.
Imagine two tech startups. So founder A is a 22-year-old whose parents gave him a $2 million seed fund, let him live rent-free in their guest house, and introduced him to 5 venture capitalists.
Must be nice.
Yeah, right? And then founder B is a 22-year-old working night shifts at a warehouse to pay off student loans, coding her app between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on a refurbished laptop.
A completely different universe.
Exactly. If founder A's company succeeds and founder B's company fails, equality steps in and says, do not you dare look at founder A and call him a superior genius. Do not call his success pure virtue. His success was heavily subsidized by fate.
That is the perfect illustration. Congratulating founder A for winning a fair race isn't just inaccurate, it's deeply insulting to founder B. It completely erases the invisible tailwind that pushed him across the finish line.
But I want to pivot hard here because we really have to look at the other side of the equation. We have to look at the gravitational pull of merit. Because the human instinct for merit is just as primal and, honestly, just as necessary. If we look at how sociologists define meritocracy, like the Britannica definition from the notes, it is the radical idea that positions, power, and rewards should be assigned strictly based on ability and achievement, completely ignoring bloodline, birthright, or identity.
And just as equality taps into our deepest reservoirs of compassion, merit taps into our deepest need for self-actualization. I mean, it is intoxicating for the builders, the strivers, the people who want to look at the world and leave a dent in it.
People who want to earn their place.
Yes. Merit honors discipline. It looks at the student who skips the party to study calculus, or the immigrant who works 3 jobs to open a storefront, and it makes them a promise. It promises that status is not a closed club you have to be born into. Status is something you can build with your own 2 hands.
It's the ultimate engine of upward mobility. It tells you that the ceiling isn't made of concrete, it's made of glass, and you can break it if you hit it hard enough.
I'd actually take that a step further, because what's fascinating here is that merit provides something much more vital than just economic mobility. It provides existential meaning.
Existential meaning. How so?
It tells you that the suffering you endure to achieve a goal actually has weight in the universe. Imagine the psychological devastation of living in a system where you pour your soul into a project, you innovate, you sacrifice your health and your free time, and the system looks at you and gives you the exact same reward, the exact same recognition as the person who contributed absolutely nothing.
Man, it would completely erase the narrative arc of your life.
It fundamentally flattens the human spirit. If you flatten outcomes completely to achieve perfect equality, you don't just redistribute wealth. You redistribute meaning until it ceases to exist.
Wow.
You tell the striver that their striving was a delusion. And human beings cannot psychologically survive in an environment where their actions are entirely disconnected from their outcomes.
So here we are, 2 noble, beautiful premises. Equality wants to ensure no one is discarded due to cosmic bad luck. Merit wants to ensure that human effort is the primary currency of life. But here is where this deep dive takes a dark turn.
Here we go.
What happens when these noble ideals are removed from the messy compromise of reality and pushed to their absolute logical extremes? Because the research we are looking at argues that these ideals inevitably mutate into very dangerous forms of tunnel vision.
They really do. Both sides harbor a dark side, a severe hidden cost that their most passionate advocates constantly try to sweep under the rug.
Let's start by looking into the abyss of equality. The noble pursuit of equal dignity can very rapidly and dangerously slide into the authoritarian demand for equalized outcomes.
Which is a huge jump.
It is. It begins with the beautiful sentiment of everyone deserves a fair shot. But as you push toward the extreme, the system begins to view any difference in the final result as morally suspicious.
And the cascading costs of that slide are catastrophic. First, we see the death of motivation. Like, why endure the pain of sacrifice if the end state is legally guaranteed to be identical to the state of apathy?
You just stop trying.
Exactly. It isn't a moral failing to stop working in that environment. It's a perfectly rational response to an irrational system.
Yeah.
And second, you see a massive institutional decline in standards. If an organization becomes terrified of the optics of unequal performance, the easiest solution is to stop measuring performance altogether.
Oh, I see. You stop distinguishing between the competent surgeon and the incompetent surgeon because pointing out the difference violates the doctrine of equality. Excellence literally becomes something you have to actively hide.
And we cannot ignore the emotional mutation that occurs here either. A very common myth is that enforcing equality eradicates societal resentment.
It doesn't.
It absolutely does not. The resentment just changes direction. Instead of the impoverished resenting the wealthy, the highly productive people begin to deeply, venomously resent a system that consumes their output without acknowledging their effort. They realize they are being exploited to subsidize the comfortable stagnation of others.
The text points to Kurt Vonnegut's brilliant short story, Harrison Bergeron, to illustrate this extreme. It's a chilling satire of a future America where the government finally achieves total equality.
A classic.
Yeah, but they don't do it by elevating the disadvantaged. They do it by systematically handicapping anyone with a natural advantage.
Right.
If you are beautiful, the state forces you to wear a grotesque mask. If you are physically strong, you have to wear canvas bags filled with lead weights padlocked to your neck.
Just dragging you down.
Literally. If you are highly intelligent, you have to wear a government earpiece that blasts deafening sounds like a siren or a hammer striking glass every 20 seconds to scatter your thoughts so you can't take advantage of your own brain.
It is equality enforced by violent subtraction. Instead of giving everyone a ladder, you just cut off the legs of the tall people.
We don't even have to look at science fiction to see traces of this. Think about the modern debates happening right now in certain school districts where administrators have proposed eliminating advanced math classes or gifted programs in middle schools.
I've read about this, yeah.
The logic is that if only a subset of students can pass the advanced class, it creates unequal outcomes that damage the self-esteem of the students in the standard class. So instead of finding a way to lift the struggling students into the advanced class, they just eliminate the advanced class entirely.
Right.
It is the literal removal of the ladder to ensure everyone stays on the ground floor together.
And that perfectly encapsulates the deepest fear of the merit advocate, that equality, when left unchecked, becomes a punitive bureaucratic war against human excellence itself.
But let me stop you right there, because the document does not let merit off the hook. We have to shine that exact same harsh light on the dark side of merit. What is the hidden cost when we worship at the altar of ability?
Well, the fatal flaw of merit is that it almost never exists in the pure, objective state it claims to. In practice, a meritocracy very quickly becomes a sophisticated machine designed to launder privilege.
Laundering privilege. Walk me through exactly how that mechanism works.
Okay, think about money laundering. You take dirty money obtained through illegal means, you run it through a legitimate cash-intensive business like a car wash, and the money comes out the other side looking like clean legal profit.
Okay, makes sense.
Meritocracy does the exact same thing with social advantage. A winner in our system holds up their Ivy League degree or their massive corporate salary and says, I earned this through pure merit. I passed the tests. I did the interviews. And they probably did work hard. But the meritocratic machine allows them to completely strip away the context.
So they conveniently forget the expensive zip code that funded their public school through property taxes, the SAT prep tutors, the legacy admissions, the safety net that allowed them to take an unpaid internship in New York City.
Exactly that. The system takes all those unearned circumstantial advantages, runs them through the washed cycle of a standardized test or a job interview, and the result comes out the other side gleaming with the sheen of pure, undeniable virtue. They literally launder their luck into merit. And the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy raises a massive red flag here. How do you even objectively define what merit is?
Because it's not a physical law of the universe. It's an artificial construct. I mean, is merit defined by a high score on a standardized math test? Is it the
Mm.
ability to code in Python? Is it emotional intelligence? Is it the sheer volume of widgets you can assemble in an hour? Or is it blind obedience to a corporate structure?
That's the problem. Whichever group happens to hold power in a society gets to write the definition of merit. And, shock of all shocks, they almost always define merit using the exact metrics that their own children are specifically trained to excel at.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Are you suggesting that individual effort is a complete myth? Because if I am a middle-class kid and I actively choose to stay in the library until 4 a.m. every night for 4 years, while my peers are out partying and sleeping in, my resulting high GPA is not laundered privilege. I bled for that. I earned that. Doesn't calling it laundered privilege invalidate my very real agency?
That is a crucial pushback, and it gets to the very heart of the tension. Your effort is absolutely real, and it is a massive variable in your success. The critique of merit isn't saying that hard work doesn't exist. It is saying that the baseline from which you exert that effort is entirely unearned.
Okay, I'm following.
Your ability to stay in the library until 4 a.m. implies you didn't have to work a night shift to feed your siblings. Your ability to focus implies you weren't dealing with untreated chronic pain. The merit trap is assuming that the person with the lower GPA simply chose to party, rather than acknowledging they might have been exerting the exact same amount of effort just to survive an invisible headwind.
And when a society ignores that invisible headwind, merit becomes psychologically brutal. The text uses a phrase that I found genuinely haunting. It says merit moralizes hierarchy.
This is where meritocracy becomes crueler than aristocracy.
Crueler. How so?
Well, think about a feudal peasant in the 14th century. They were at the absolute bottom of the social pyramid. But why were they there? Because they were born a peasant. It was a cosmic lottery. God or fate or the king decreed it. The peasant could look at the king and know, deep down, you aren't intrinsically better than me, you just had the right parents.
Right, the injustice was obvious.
The peasant could maintain their internal spiritual pride because the injustice of the system was completely transparent.
But in a pure meritocracy, the system looks you in the eye and tells you that the game is perfectly fair. Everyone had a chance. So if you end up at the bottom,
The system tells you that you explicitly deserve to be there. It tells you that your failure is not a matter of bad luck. It is a profound moral and intellectual failure on your part.
ouch.
It breeds an insufferable hubris at the top elites who genuinely believe their wealth is a reflection of their divine superiority, and it breeds profound, crushing humiliation at the bottom. The system claims it is an open door, but practically it degrades into what the text calls a test-taking aristocracy.
So we synthesize this tragedy of the extremes. Equality's ultimate vice is mediocrity, a forced flattening of human potential, clipping the wings of anyone who tries to fly too high. And merit's ultimate vice is cruelty disguised as fairness, a machine that kicks the vulnerable while they're down and hands them a spreadsheet proving it's their own fault.
So if both of these ideals have such fatal, built-in flaws, how has humanity actually tried to implement them? Because we don't just sit around debating this in armchairs. We build governments, write constitutions, and fight revolutions over these exact ideas.
Let's step out of the realm of theory and into the real-world battlegrounds, because history is essentially a metronome violently swinging between these two poles, trying to correct the unbearable abuses of the other. Let's look at a historical correction driven purely by the hunger for equality, the French Revolution.
Pre-revolutionary France is the ultimate example of a rigged starting line. The society was locked into the estate system. The first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility, held staggering inherited privileges.
They had all the cards.
They owned the vast majority of the land, they held all the military and political power, and crucially, they were largely exempt from taxation. Meanwhile, the third estate, the peasants, the artisans, the nascent bourgeoisie, carried the entire crushing weight of the nation's economy on their backs, with zero political voice.
So when the revolution erupts, it is the visceral scream of the equality instinct. It is the third estate tearing down the gates, demanding that bloodline privilege be burned to the ground. They wanted civil equality.
And they achieved the destruction of the old order. But the grim historical lesson of the French Revolution is that simply abolishing a rigged system does not magically generate a humane equilibrium.
No, it got very dark very fast.
Very dark. They tore down the aristocracy, but in their zealous pursuit of radical equality, they plunged the nation into the reign of terror. The state became paranoid, viewing any accumulated wealth or dissenting thought as a threat to the egalitarian ideal. The pursuit of equality ended with the guillotine working overtime.
If we want to look at an even more extreme historical warning regarding equality, the research points us to the early Soviet era, specifically the period of war communism. We're talking about the attempt to instantly manifest total economic equality by abolishing private property entirely.
And the sheer administrative violence required to enforce that level of identical outcomes is terrifying. To achieve pure economic equality, the state utilized mass expropriation. They nationalized every single industry. But it wasn't just taking over factories. It was the forced grain requisitioning from the peasantry.
Let's make sure we understand exactly what forced grain requisitioning means on a human level. It is not a tax form. It means armed squads of state agents kicking in the door of a farmer's barn in the dead of winter.
It's brutal.
It means taking the food that farmer grew with their own hands, food meant to keep their children alive, because if that farmer retained more grain than the farmer in the next village, the sacred mathematical pattern of equality was broken. It was equality achieved at the barrel of a rifle.
When advocates for merit look at history, this is the nightmare they are pointing to. They understand that perfect economic equality sounds beautiful in a poem, but in reality, it requires a centralized authoritarian apparatus with infinite coercive power to constantly squash human initiative and seize the fruits of individual labor.
But we cannot just critique the equality swings. Let's look at the historical dream of merit. The source document brings up the Imperial Chinese civil service examinations, which operated for centuries.
This is widely considered the ultimate historical prototype for meritocracy. It was a staggering logistical achievement. Instead of appointing government officials based on nobility or royal favor, the Chinese Empire created a wildly rigorous system of written examinations based on Confucian texts.
So anyone could take them.
In theory, yes. A peasant boy from a rural province could study hard, pass the local exam, pass the provincial exam, and eventually be summoned to the capital to serve the emperor.
It was a massive structural engine for social mobility. It was the radical idea that competence should rule over blood.
A beautiful theory. But let's look at the how of this system. How did one actually pass these exams? It required decades of grueling full-time study. It required mastering thousands of complex characters, classical poetry, and historical essays. In an ancient agricultural society, how does a peasant boy do that?
He doesn't. Because if he's studying, he isn't planting rice. And if he isn't planting rice, his family starves.
Precisely. And beyond the lost labor, think of the physical costs.
Right.
Ink was expensive. Paper was expensive. Candles to read by at night were expensive.
So it wasn't really a level playing field at all.
Not even close. So over generations, the wealthy merchant and landowning families realized they could game the system. They pooled their massive resources, built private libraries, hired the most brilliant tutors, and completely insulated their sons from manual labor so they could study 16 hours a day.
Wow.
The wealthy learned how to guard the doorway. The exam system, which was designed to shatter the aristocracy, slowly hardened back into an aristocracy. It was just a hierarchy certified by a test score rather than a birth certificate.
Guarding the doorway. That perfectly transitions us to how modern nations are trying to solve this today, because we are still fighting the ghost of those Chinese exams. Let's look at two modern, real-world models. First, the Nordic welfare states, like Sweden or Denmark.
The Nordic model is fascinating because it doesn't try to obliterate the tension. It tries to harness it. It is not a Soviet-style attempt to force equal outcomes. They have billionaires, they have highly competitive tech sectors, they have free markets. The text describes their philosophy as equal security plus competitive participation.
They are making a massive societal wager. They're betting that free market merit actually works better when the fear of absolute ruin is removed. They heavily tax their populations to provide universal health care, free higher education, and incredibly robust unemployment safety nets.
They raise the floor of human dignity so high that no one falls into the abyss. And their logic is that if an entrepreneur knows that a failed business won't result in their children losing their health insurance, they're actually more likely to take the risk, innovate, and compete. They equalize a baseline to legitimize the race.
Now let's jump across the globe to Singapore, which the text highlights as a glittering, modern success story built unapologetically on merit.
Singapore leans into competitive selection with immense intensity. They sort students early based on academic ability. They pay their civil servants massive salaries comparable to the private sector to ensure they attract the absolute best talent to run the country. They openly prize high achievement and economic output.
But the document points out a crucial nuance here. Singapore isn't blind to the dark side. Their own internal policy leaders publicly agonize over the fact that their intense meritocracy is actively reproducing class advantages.
They're seeing the loop close.
Exactly. They are watching the Imperial Chinese exam problem play out in real time. The brilliant kids who won the meritocratic race 30 years ago are now wealthy parents, and they are using that wealth to hyper-tutor their own kids, creating a new hereditary elite. Singapore is constantly trying to tweak its educational pathways to disrupt the very hierarchy its meritocracy creates.
Which brings us to the ultimate battleground, the place where this tension is currently explosive, the United States context,
Yeah.
the American contradiction. The document dives straight into the radioactive core of this debate, college admissions and affirmative action.
You really cannot find a better crucible for the equality versus merit war than who gets admitted to an elite American university.
No, you can't.
The text examines the 2023 U.S. Supreme Court decision involving Harvard and the University of North Carolina. In that decision, the court essentially struck down race-conscious admissions, stating they violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Now, for our listeners who aren't constitutional lawyers, the Equal Protection Clause basically promises that a state must treat an individual in the same manner as others in similar conditions and circumstances, theoretically prohibiting discrimination based on race.
And looking at this purely through the sociological lens of our research, that Supreme Court case was a collision of two entirely incompatible languages of fairness. Both sides genuinely, fiercely believed they were fighting for justice.
Let's break down those languages. The equality side looked at the admissions process and said, fairness requires correcting historical and structural debt. They argued that if you look at the centuries of deliberate, state-sponsored exclusion, redlining, and wealth extraction inflicted upon minority populations, relying purely on SAT scores is a farce. It is pretending the track is level when it is actively tilted. Therefore, fairness demands that we adjust the evaluation process to account for that historical headwind.
But the merit side spoke a completely different language. They looked at the Equal Protection Clause and argued that fairness requires rigid, common rules for individual selection, completely blind to ancestry. They argued that the moment an institution alters the required test score or GPA threshold based on an applicant's racial identity, the system stops being fair and becomes fundamentally discriminatory.
One side says the inputs to the system are poisoned by history, so we must calibrate the evaluation to be fair. The other side says if you calibrate the evaluation based on identity, you have destroyed fairness entirely.
Two different worlds.
But I have to challenge the merit argument here, looking at the macro data. The United States culturally worships merit. The entire mythology of the American dream is that anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Yet the document cites hard data from the OECD and the World Bank showing that social mobility in the U.S. is often stagnant, and family background heavily dictates your life trajectory. If the American dream is statistically faltering, doesn't that mean the doctrine of pure merit is a lie we tell ourselves to feel better about inequality?
That is the American contradiction staring you in the face. We preach a gospel of pure individual merit, but we tolerate staggering inequalities at the starting line. When the daily reality of stagnant mobility collides with the soaring mythology of merit, the result is massive societal friction. People feel utterly betrayed by the system.
So, if history shows us that both extremes fail, and modern politics is just a shouting match, how do we intellectually resolve this? We have to look at how the greatest minds of the 20th century attempted to solve this exact puzzle. We are moving into the philosophical fault line. And we are looking at the heavyweight title fight of political philosophy, John Rawls versus Robert Nozick.
Oh, this is the good stuff. If you want to understand why you disagree with your neighbor about taxes, you have to understand Rawls and Nozick. Let's begin with John Rawls, who published A Theory of Justice in 1971. Rawls is the architect of the most sophisticated defense of equality. But what makes Rawls brilliant is that he isn't a communist. He doesn't demand perfectly flat, identical outcomes.
He doesn't.
No. He creates a framework to figure out when inequality is morally acceptable.
He does this using his famous thought experiment, the veil of ignorance. Let's walk the listener through this because it is just mind-bending.
Imagine you are floating in a void, waiting to be born into a brand new society. But you are behind a veil of ignorance. You have no idea what your position in this new society will be. You don't know if you will be born male or female, white or black, a billionaire or a beggar, a genius or severely disabled. You know absolutely nothing about your future self.
Total blank slate.
Rawls asks, From that position of total ignorance, what kind of economic and social rules would you agree to create for this new society?
Wow. I mean, if I don't know if I'm going to be the CEO or the janitor, I'm certainly not going to agree to a society where the janitor starves in the street. I would hedge my bets. I would want a system that ensures that even if I end up at the very bottom, my life is still dignified and protected.
Exactly. Because you are acting out of rational self-interest behind the veil, Rawls argues you would naturally design a society that protects the most vulnerable, because you might be the most vulnerable. From this, he derives his core rule. Inequality is only justified if it ultimately improves the condition of the least advantaged members of society.
Okay, let's make that concrete. He allows inequality if it helps the poorest person.
Yes, imagine two societies. In Society A, everybody makes exactly $50,000. Total equality. In Society B, a brilliant biomedical engineer makes $500,000. But because of the life-saving technology that engineer invents and the economic growth they spur, the poorest person in Society B has a standard of living equivalent to $70,000.
Oh, I see the difference.
Rawls says Society B, the unequal society, is morally superior. But the engineer's immense wealth is only justified because it raised the floor for the poorest person. Rawls asks this foundational question. What distribution of wealth could free and equal people justify to one another?
It's an incredibly powerful way to look at the world. But 3 years later, in 1974, a philosopher named Robert Nozick drops a nuclear bomb on Rawls' theory. Nozick writes Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and he provides the ultimate libertarian counterpunch. Nozick looks at Rawls' obsession with the final distribution of wealth and says, you are looking at the wrong end of the telescope.
Nozick fundamentally shifts the focus from the outcome to the process.
The document breaks down Nozick's entitlement theory, which consists of 3 very simple rules. Just acquisition, just transfer, and rectification, basically. Did you acquire your resources fairly without stealing or defrauding anyone? Did you transfer or trade them voluntarily? And if someone was robbed, was it rectified?
If the answer is yes, then whatever the final distribution of wealth looks like is mathematically and morally just, even if it is wildly unequal. Nozick argues that justice is not a visual pattern of equality.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Let's use a modern example to explain Nozick's brilliance. Let's look at the creator economy. Imagine a society that is perfectly equal. Everyone has exactly $1,000. Now imagine a massively popular Twitch streamer or a YouTuber. Over the course of a year, 1 million individual people voluntarily decide to give that streamer one single dollar of their own money because they enjoy the entertainment. At the end of the year, the streamer has $1 million and everyone else has 999.
The pattern of perfect equality has been completely destroyed. We now have massive inequality.
But Nozick asks the devastating question. Who was wronged? Was it an injustice? Every single person who gave a dollar did so freely and voluntarily. The streamer didn't steal it. They provided a service people valued.
This is where it gets incredibly deep. The document highlights Nozick's ultimate challenge to Rawls. Nozick asks, by what right does anyone continuously rearrange what others have legitimately earned?
Right, because to maintain Rawls' pattern,
The government has to step in and forcefully take that $1 million away from the streamer and redistribute it. Nozick argues that forcing a pattern requires continuous tyrannical interference in the free choices of human beings.
you see the collision perfectly. Rawls is brilliantly trying to protect the community from the ravages of bad luck. But Nozick is brilliantly protecting human agency, ownership, and voluntary exchange from what he sees as endless, overreaching state meddling.
It is the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. And that specific philosophical fault line is exactly what organizes our modern political parties. Let's move into the political lens of this deep dive. And I want to issue a massive disclaimer to our listeners. We are executing this section with absolute strict impartiality. We are not endorsing a political party. We are acting as sociologists, observing how these two philosophical instincts, equality and merit, have mapped onto the American political spectrum.
It is a crucial exercise, because the source document makes a vital point. Modern politics is rarely a battle of pure good versus evil, no matter what cable news algorithms try to feed you. It's fundamentally a battle of interpreting the exact same data through different lenses.
Let's break down the Democratic coalition, which generally leans toward the equality side of the axis, the Rawlsian side. The text describes this coalition as using a corrective lens, meaning they look at the world and they see a machine that constantly needs fixing and calibrating.
When someone using a corrective lens looks at unequal outcomes, for example, looking at a spreadsheet showing massive disparities in home ownership or maternal mortality rates between different zip codes or racial demographics. They don't see that as a natural reflection of effort.
What do they see?
They see those unequal outcomes as undeniable mathematical proof of structural injustice. They assume that if the results are that wildly skewed, the underlying system must be biased, historically broken, or actively exclusionary.
Therefore, their political energy is focused on correction, expanding the social safety net, implementing progressive taxation to redistribute wealth, creating regulations to rein in corporate power, and actively trying to level the playing field. For this coalition, the definition of fairness equals balanced outcomes and corrected systems.
Now let's shift to the Republican coalition, which generally leans toward the merit side of the axis, the Nozikian side. The text describes this coalition as using a preservative lens.
Right, they look at the exact same spreadsheet, the exact same unequal outcomes in wealth or home ownership, and they interpret the data completely differently.
They do. Broadly speaking, they trust the process of the free market. When they see unequal outcomes, they do not immediately assume the system is rigged. They believe that outcomes, while acknowledging some imperfections, generally reveal accurate information about human behavior. They see unequal wealth as a reflection of unequal risk-taking, unequal effort, and unequal value creation.
So if someone is highly successful, the assumption is they built a better mousetrap and earned their reward. If someone is struggling, the primary assumption is that they need to exert more personal responsibility, make better choices, or acquire better skills. Therefore, their political energy is focused on preserving the system, lowering taxes so people keep what they earn, removing government regulations that stifle business, and promoting individual self-reliance. For this coalition, the definition of fairness equals consistent, unchanging rules and earned results.
But the document reveals a fascinating detail that is entirely lost in the toxicity of modern discourse. There is a massive quiet overlap. The two sides actually agree on far more than they admit to themselves.
If you step away from the fringes of social media, both sides fundamentally believe that opportunity is a good thing. They both agree that upward mobility is the hallmark of a healthy nation. The vast majority of Republicans actively reject the idea of a pure, inherited aristocracy where your bloodline dictates your fate. And the vast majority of Democrats actively reject the idea of total Soviet-style forced sameness where individual effort is completely ignored.
The text uncovers a deeper emotional layer to this overlap. At their core, both sides care deeply about the exact same underlying value, dignity. They just locate it in different places. The political left emphasizes dignity through protection and inclusion, making sure no one falls through the cracks and starves. The political right emphasizes dignity through agency and self-determination, making sure no one is blocked from climbing the ladder by an overbearing government. It is the exact same value, pursued down entirely different conflicting paths.
That is a profound way to view the people you disagree with. They aren't trying to destroy dignity, they are trying to save a different version of it. But I have to ask the obvious question. If they share these underlying values and they both reject the absolute extremes, why is the polarization so toxic right now?
The research offers a brilliant answer. It comes down to lived experiences and the resulting institutional trust. People don't adopt these political philosophies by reading Rawls and Nozick in a library. They experience their way into them. If your lived experience involves seeing unfair barriers up close, maybe you watched a brilliant friend get crushed by medical debt from a random illness, or you've experienced systemic bias in a job hunt, then equality doesn't feel like an abstract theory. It feels like an urgent moral emergency.
And on the flip side, if your lived experience involves sacrificing heavily, maybe you risked your life savings to build a small plumbing business, you worked 80-hour weeks for a decade, you almost went bankrupt twice, and you finally succeeded, then merit is not an economic theory. It feels sacred. So when you hear a politician talking about raising taxes to redistribute the rewards of your agonizing effort, it doesn't feel like policy. It feels like a direct assault on your identity and your struggle.
So the toxicity arises because the two sides aren't just disagreeing on the best solution. They are fundamentally disagreeing on what the problem actually is. The Equality Coalition thinks the problem is that the race is totally rigged. The Merit Coalition thinks the problem is that people are trying to cancel the race entirely. When you disagree on the basic nature of reality, every debate immediately escalates into an existential threat.
This brings us to the interconnected web of values, because the tension between equality and merit doesn't just sit in a vacuum. It is the core engine that pulls almost every other societal debate along with it. It dictates how we view the collective versus the individual.
Let's trace those connections. The equality instinct naturally aligns with the collective. If you believe our fates are intertwined and we rise and fall together, you focus on group outcomes. This necessitates an alignment with regulation because you believe free markets, if left alone, will naturally consolidate power and create unfair imbalances that must be corrected. And logically, you cannot have large-scale equalization without centralization. You need a powerful, centralized authority, a strong federal government to collect taxes, redistribute resources, and enforce civil rights.
Conversely, the merit instinct naturally aligns with the individual. The focus is strictly on personal responsibility and your unique trajectory. This aligns inherently with free markets, trusting the invisible hand to organically reward value creation without top-down interference. And it heavily prefers decentralization states' rights, local control, allowing for fierce competition and varied outcomes, rather than monolithic control from a capital city.
I think the most striking observation the text makes here is how both sides weaponize the word freedom. Both coalitions loudly, aggressively claim they are the sole true defenders of freedom.
Both sides claim they're fighting for freedom. But equality means freedom from hardship, while merit means freedom to strive. It is the freedom of knowing you won't starve to death if you lose your job, versus the freedom to keep the wealth you generate without a bureaucracy putting a ceiling on your ambition.
It's amazing how these concepts adapt, and the document notes that these aren't perfectly clean lines. For example, merit is often aligned with tradition today, but historically, like in the French Revolution, merit was a radical progressive idea against aristocratic tradition.
Okay, we have thoroughly mapped the battlefield, so we have to arrive at the synthesis. The ultimate question for this deep dive is, how do we actually live with this? How do we build a society that doesn't collapse into either extreme?
The most sobering conclusion in the research is that you cannot permanently solve this tension. It is a constant breathing in and breathing out over generations, a rhythmic cycle.
Walk me through the mechanics of that cycle. How does a society breathe?
Let's say a society establishes a highly functional, relatively clean merit system. It rewards its high performers brilliantly. What happens naturally? It creates inequality, because humans have different talents and drives. The high performers accumulate vast advantages, wealth, elite networks, the best real estate. They then naturally want to pass those advantages to their children.
Right, which is a deeply human instinct. You want to give your kid a better life.
Hmm.
But by doing that, the meritocracy starts to calcify. It begins to look exactly like the old inherited aristocracy it originally replaced.
Precisely. The starting line becomes so skewed that the perceived unfairness triggers a massive equality correction. The society pushes for heavy taxation and redistribution. The outcomes compress. But eventually, incentive concerns rise. Economic growth slows, innovation stalls, and people begin asking, why am I working so hard? That societal stagnation then triggers a merit correction and the pendulum swings back.
It's an endless pursuit of equilibrium. But the text introduces a massive practical roadblock to this entire cycle, the measurement problem. We talk about rewarding merit as if it is a physical element we can mine from the earth. But we don't actually measure true merit. We measure proxies like test scores and income.
Yes, and those proxies often undervalue vital human contributions. Think about raising children, caring for an elderly parent, or doing the quiet, unglamorous work of building community trust. The merit system is entirely blind to what it cannot easily count.
So what does this all mean? The research offers a nuanced synthesis, an optimal guiding principle. It says, equalize what people cannot control. Differentiate what they can.
That is the tightrope walk of a healthy civilization. You aggressively equalize the starting conditions. You insulate your citizens from the sheer, arbitrary bad luck of where they were born, providing basic healthcare and education. You clear the noise at the starting line.
So that merit can actually matter at the finish line. Once you've controlled for the unearned disadvantages, you can confidently allow for differentiation, rewarding risk, effort, and excellence.
But the document stresses that this is a fragile, living equilibrium. A good system doesn't eliminate the tension. It stays awake to it.
It stays awake. Whether you are evaluating your own life, your workplace, or your vote, remember the tier-shaped conclusion. Protect dignity at the bottom. Preserve meaning at the top.
It reinforces that the real danger isn't choosing a side, but failing to see the people behind the systems, failing to see hidden struggles, or failing to recognize individual distinction.
Here is something to chew on long after this deep dive ends. If we look at the rapid rise of AI and automation, we are approaching a future where human effort might be completely decoupled from economic value. If machines can outperform us in almost every measurable way, will merit, as we currently define it, cease to exist? And if our effort no longer produces economic value, how will we redefine what makes a human life worthwhile? Thank you so much for joining the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.